sure we're all familiar with the crazy prices that are happening with the UK housing market at the moment, specifically as well in the south of the UK. The rate at which the property prices are going up in the UK, along with the inflation and the interest rates, are going to be pricing many of us out. If you don't watch this video fully, you will maybe never be able to actually purchase a house and actually get onto the ladder of home ownership. In this video, I'm going to go over the history of house prices and where we sit currently compared to where we were before, what's happened recently to get us to this point and what's happening today, like in context, and how you can start to plan and protect yourself against this problem and actually get into the market before it prices us out forever. We'll break down the maths and actually look at how much house you can afford and what's comfortable for you to be able to afford that, and where you're going to get your deposit from, along with whether it's actually even a good idea that you buy a house, whether you should actually rent or maybe look at an alternative. So let's jump into the history of the housing market, because the history of housing goes back a long time. We have records that go back to 1086. We're going to take a look basically back 170 years. That's as far back as we're going to look in this video today. This is the chart showing over the last 170 years what's happened to the affordability of housing compared to the amount you can borrow against your income. As you can see, it was actually way more unaffordable way back in the 1800s. Now, the reason it came on such a long decline, over the next 70 years, it just started dropping the whole way. You can see in the chart here. The reason for that was over that 70-year period, the Victorians built double the amount of houses they currently had on supply. The years 1851 to 1911, they built 3.9 million homes, all the way up to 8.9 million. Especially with the amount of population that was there at the time, that is a lot of houses over 70 years. So anyone who knows basic economics would know that the supply, they're saying roughly the same. You've got the similar-ish population, and that grows at a steady rate. If there's now, over the next 70 years, double the amount of houses, and the demand stays the same, the prices will go down, and that's what we're seeing in that chart. Property sizes also shrunk as a whole. So we went from detached big houses like that to semi-detached houses and terraced housing. And that dropped the average size of the house significantly. It used to be 928 meters squared is the typical like standard house size before they started doing all of this. Then the average dropped to just 258 meters squared. So this is almost 25% the original size of the house. This is insane. But as well as the population shifted a huge amount. It used to be 75% of people were renting in 1918. Then at the end of the decade, it was more like 75% were home owners. This is because back in the day, when 1918, no one was going to be able to buy it unless you were super wealthy. You're buying 1,000 square meter house. It's just not going to happen.
Because you're a povo.
But as there were so many more houses built and these houses became smaller, the prices came down a lot for them, and it was actually reasonable and within reality for people to buy these. And that's why you see the flip from 75% renters to 75% home ownership. So that leaves us at where we're at today, and it's not a pretty sight if I'm being completely honest with you. As of current data from November of 2022, house prices are now the most unaffordable they have ever been in the last 150 years. Now, if you remember from just previously talking about it, the way we got out of that problem is we doubled the amount of houses we had like just around the UK, and we made them 25% of the size they were initially. We can't do that again. We cannot build, I mean, I think it's like 28 million homes we have at the moment. We'd have to get to like 56, 58 million homes in the next 70 years, and that's just not possible. The rate we're going at, it just isn't going to happen. And also, we can't shrink houses another 25%. It just isn't going to happen. You'll see in some areas like London and stuff, there are micro apartments and stuff like that, but the average UK household is not going to shrink another 25%. It just physically, you can't fit people in that. As interest rates are starting to go up, the interest rate is a very key part of your mortgage payment and how much you're paying just overall in general. If you bought a £300,000 property and you had a 2% interest rate when you purchased that property to start with, assuming you put 10% down and you're over a 25-year mortgage, your payment would have been roughly about £1,140-ish a month. But in today's standard, if you were going to lock in that mortgage again, so same house price, you put 10% down and everything, but it's now not 2%, it's 6%, your payment is now £1,740 a month. Same house, same everything, you put the same amount of cash in and everything like that, you are now paying almost 50% more. The issue with this interest rate is that a lot of people aren't actually feeling the effect of this. Of the 8.8 million homes that are owned outright completely, 4.1 of them are owned by people who are over the age of 65, so they're not thinking of planning or selling that house and buying a new one, and they don't get affected by the interest rate of what's happening currently. So those people aren't going to be letting go of those houses. They're not going to go back into the market, and we can't build them fast enough. So if you're not getting aggressive on the way you're getting into the housing market and on the housing ladder, you will be priced out sooner rather than later. So what do you need to do? Is it too late? And how can you actually get onto this ladder and actually start getting your foot in the door of home ownership? First of all, do you really need to own a home? Renting can be a lot cheaper some of the times, especially in certain areas. If you are a renter, you won't be affected by the interest rates on your mortgage because you don't have one. Things as well, like the deposit you won't have to fork up. There's no legal fees you have to pay or stamp duty or anything like that. You just pay the monthly payment of your rent, and that's gets everything covered. You don't pay for maintenance, anything that breaks down, that is not your problem. It can work out a lot cheaper. On average over the UK, it's about £122 a month cheaper to rent than it is to buy. Now again, this depends on the area. A lot of places, like say in London, it is much cheaper to rent than it is to buy, but as you get further out, house prices get cheaper and it gets a little bit easier for you to buy and less so to rent. So that leads me on to the second point, which is, are you going to move further away? Because if you move further away from London and typically further up north, you can get more house for same price or for less money. A general rule of thumb and something good to learn is if you're planning on living in that area or wherever you're looking at for the next 10 years or more, it's probably better to buy the house. But if you plan on moving within that 10-year period, it's cheaper to rent if you take into account the fact like maintenance costs and all that kind of stuff, and then contrasted with the appreciation of the house if you were to buy. Over the 10-year period, you'll win. If you bought under that, you probably won't know. So let's say you do want to buy a house. What do you need to do? How much do you need to have? How much house can you buy? So typically you need to put 10% of the cash value of the house into it as the deposit. This is the hardest part for a lot of people because this is a lot of money to muster up. I'll touch on it in 2 seconds on how you can actually get that 10% because there's a couple different ways you can go to get that 10% of the house deposit down. But I want to quickly touch on the 90% of the mortgage is what you're going to take on. So the house is 100%. You're taking 10% of that in cash that you put down as a deposit. You can put 5% and some first-time buyers can do that, but as a general rule, it's better to do 10%. So you're going to mortgage the other 90% of that house. So how much can you mortgage? How much house can you buy? What does that 90% look like for you? To calculate the number, you need to look at how much you take in after tax. Now, get that number as a household, so total income coming in after tax. And the general rule of thumb is you shouldn't have your mortgage payment be more than 35% of that amount. 35% for me personally is a little bit too high. If you want to have like a bit more of a comfortable life and spend on other things, I would reduce this to about 30% as a maximum. So if we take the average yearly wage of 34,000-ish pounds, times by 2, because there's 2 people earning this wage, you bring home roughly about 4.6k. So 30% of that would be 1,380 pounds. That's how much your mortgage payment should be. You can calculate this number for you by just getting your after-tax income for everyone in your household and then timing it by 0.3. That's your monthly mortgage payment you can afford comfortably. Keep in mind, you can actually borrow more than this. You can borrow 4.5 times your salary, but this really does extend you into that 35-40% of your salary, and I don't recommend you do that. And this is what we're seeing with the amount of mortgage arrears that are happening currently. There are a lot of people who are in arrears in their mortgages because they borrowed too big, stretched themselves at 4.5%, and then when the interest rates went up, it just pushed them too far out of their budget. Now, so you've got the monthly payment you can afford. Now you need to find the interest rate that's happening currently at the time. At the moment, for a 5-year fixed mortgage, it's going to be about 4.8% as the general market average. If you put that into a calculator, you'll be able to find that basically you're going to be able to borrow anywhere from 270,000 to 230,000, 279-ish thousand if you're getting a 35-year term, and then 25-year term, that'll bring you to that 240-ish number. And if you times that number by 1.1, roughly, this is adding your deposit back on. It's not perfect maths, but it does work quite well. You're looking at around a house price total value all in of 309-ish thousand pounds or 270-ish. There are a lot of effects that can affect your mortgage payment in total and your household bills as a whole. Say interest rates tomorrow drop to 3%, so they're not 4.8%, they're now 3%. You can now actually afford a house of 291,000 on a 25-year term, or almost 60,000 on a 35-year term. However, if the interest rate then went back up, you would then be paying something like £1,700 a month. This is where your financial situation and your career prospects will come into play. So if you think you'll be earning more and that 1,700 fits in within your budget of the 30% as you progress in your career, then maybe it's a smart move for you. Now, to get the deposit, how do you do this? There's 3 main ways you can do this. You can either use a lifetime ISA. There used to be a help to buy ISA, but that no longer exists. So you have the lifetime ISA, you have stocks and shares ISAs, and you have cash in a high interest savings account. A lifetime ISA is probably best for most people who are aiming to buy a house. Now, this is a key caveat. You have to be buying a house. You have to know for certain you're going to be buying a house. You see, if you pull that money out for any reason before the age of 60 that is not buying a house, it will tax you 25% on the stuff you take out. Pros of the scheme though are you can put £4,000 in a year and the government will give you an extra £1,000 every single year. Problem is though, it's only £4,000 a year that you can put in. So say you're saving for 4 years. That's now going to be £16,000 plus the extra £4,000 that's gone on to your £20,000. However, it's predicted that the average house price in the UK will rise to be about £300,000 in 2028, so that's 4 years from now. So you've got 20k and it's now 300k for your average house. you're still not quite there. Now, if you're having a partner who can also do this, you'll be able to get there with some spare change as well. But for a lot of people, 4K isn't aggressive enough to be able to actually buy the house or put the deposit down. They'll want to be able to put more in a year than 4K. So that's where the second option comes in. You have the stocks and shares ISA. So this you can put up to £20,000 in. If you're looking to be a bit more aggressive and get into the housing market, onto the housing ladder quicker, this is probably your better bet. And you can invest in a wide range of assets. So you can stick with your S&P 500, that will give you your roughly 8% a year. However, there is a caveat here of you are taking more risk by doing this. When you do the Help to Buy ISA or the Lifetime ISA, there's no real risk involved in that, apart from obviously when you take your money out. But if it's a bad year in the stock market and you're thinking of buying a house in the next year or two, that can really affect the amount of money you have right now and when you want to buy a house. However, you can go into more risky assets and assets that will give you way more than the 8%. It depends on what you're doing. Over a longer period of time, I wouldn't recommend this. You're not going to be able to beat the market. No one does. But for the short amount of time, when you're doing from like the first year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, however long you're taking to buy a house, this could potentially be a better move for you. And if you're using something like Trading 2 and 2, they also have a cash element of it. So when you put your money into the brokerage account, you can get 5% on your cash anyway. Finally, the last and least risky option is just putting it in a cash savings account and getting the 4% or 4.5%, depends on where you're going and what you're banking with. This will be the safest option and the one that gives you the most flexibility. You can put stuff in, take stuff out. Say the market goes down, you may not want to take the money out at that time. The hardest part for most is being able to build up that first cash buffer of getting you to that deposit. From there, it's about looking at the houses and timing the market a little bit in terms of interest rates and house prices and where you want to live. Now, if this is all too much, you're not thinking about buying a house, or it's going to be too far out of your reach and it's not something you're really aiming for, I'd highly recommend you look into alternatives. Maybe you buy some land and you build a tiny home, or maybe you live on a narrowboat, or maybe you live in a van. Maybe you move abroad. There's many different ways you can kind of structure your housing. Again, there's also renting, and renting leaves more money in your pocket so you can spend it on other things that may be more of a priority to you. £122 that you're saving via renting and buying a house, you could put into your retirement and maybe retire a bit earlier. And in some cases, and if you're doing the right things, you can retire a lot earlier with £122 a month. And renting can be sometimes a less stressful thing. It's just, none of it's yours. You can just go in, you use it, you leave it when you don't want it. If you're looking at this path a bit more seriously, you're looking at how do I buy a house and all that kind of stuff, I'd highly recommend you watch the video I did on retirement first, because if you don't set this up first, you may never be able to buy a house or retire. Retirement should be something you set up before you bought your house, because once you lock into this house, it's a huge financial decision, and if you don't have any wiggle room to be able to put money away to retire, you will never retire. A lot of people don't realize this until they watch the video, but the state pension is not going to be there when you get to retirement age. Retirement age is still going up as well. It used to be 65, it's now raised to 66, and a lot of people think in 2026 it'll go to 67. If you do ever want to retire, you should definitely watch that video. It'll show you how you can actually make your plan to get you to retire.